Welcome, everyone. Wanted to thank you for joining us for this exciting webinar and panel session. My name is Mohit Bhatnagar. I'm Senior VP of Product Management and Customer Success at Qubole. Um, I'm here joined by Justin Wainwright and Rajit Saha. Both of these are experts in the industry when it comes to data analytics and are running some of the most complex workloads in the industry. So let me just kick her off by a quick introduction about myself, and then we'll switch to Justin and Rajit. So as I said, I run product management at Qubole. Qubole is an industry-leading platform, which is an open, secure data lake for workloads ranging from data engineering, ad hoc analytics, SQL analytics, and machine learning. It's a platform which has a significant number of capabilities for different personas. But the area that we'll be focusing on today is total cost of ownership, TCO, and financial governance, where I would love to get Rajit and Justin to share their real world insights. So to kick off the discussion, Justin, could you briefly tell us about what you do and how you are looking at TCO?
Hello, everybody. I'm Justin Wainwright. I work for Oracle Data Cloud. I've been a systems analyst with them for about 6+ years now. Worked with Qubole for 5 out of the 6 years. Basically, I'm the principal systems engineer and architect for our Qubole environment across both of our clouds, AWS and Oracle Compute Cloud.
Thanks, Justin. It is actually a pleasure to have you because you are, as you said, been working on 5 years, and I think you are using some very sophisticated techniques. So really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Rajit, to you, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your background data analytics?
Yeah, so I started my journey in data back in 2010 when I was basically part of Yahoo's Code Hadoop team, right? So from that time onwards, actually, like it's basically, I started loving these big data technologies. And then in this whole journey, like finally last 4 years, I actually spent time with Lending Club, which is like one of the, top in the fintech market, right? And that's an enterprise. And then we actually started looking into how big data workload can be running in cloud with the financial data set and financial analytics and those kind of stuff. So I was leading the big data platform in Lending Club and to the cloud migration from Colo to AWS. And then Qubole was the key, player in our journey, right? So that's why I last on 1.5 years, actually, I was working with Qubole to, architect the solution and then migration completion and this kind of stuff.
Great. Yeah, Rajit, what I actually loved about the work you are doing is that on one hand, you were cutting edge in terms of using some of the sophisticated capabilities that cloud has. On the other hand, you also had to deal with your on-prem workloads and colo workloads and do the migration of it. And I think it would be great as we go through the webinar to hear your thoughts on that journey per se. Now, I understand there are a bunch of live folks who are joining the session, and as these things happen, more people will join. We will have a couple of polling things going on. So just to kick off the discussion, the people who are live, I'm going to share with you in a moment a QR code. If you take a minute, 30 seconds, take out your cameras and scan this QR code, or if that is a problem, you can go here, which is a website, polev.com/my long name, and that should work. But QR code is probably the better way of doing it. And if you can, then I will activate this poll, and would love to get your response on what's your favorite drink. So, Rajit, what is your favorite drink? As our audience are testing the system.
So with this COVID-19, like ginger tea is my favorite now.
Ginger tea. Do you kind of spike it with vodka or something in order to later in the evening?
No, actually, CDC is telling, like alcohol might be, detrimental for COVID-19. So I'm actually
That's true. And Justin, what about you?
Mainly, it's root beer for me. Root beer or ginger beer.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm with the similar camp to you guys. At least during the day, I'm sticking with my green tea. All right. So the system is working. I think we will go to some more questions during the course of the webinar. So, Rajat, let me kick off with you. And I know cost was always an integral part of every organization's priorities. However, in light of recent macroeconomic changes, it has become even more important than ever. Would you actually give us a sense on how, in light of COVID-19, and in particular over the last 1 year or so, how critical has TCO become for your organization? Rajat, let's start with you.
Yes. So one good thing about the cloud is it gives us a lot of benefits: the agility, flexibility. You can go to market very fast, and you don't have to worry about the system management and those kind of stuff. At the same time, if we are not disciplined, the cost can be skyrocketed. And if you
Right.
think about any data analytic platform, as a platform, it is always a cost center, right? Or any, especially on the big enterprises or financial sector or something like that. So like every dollar we spend on this infrastructure, like to bring the cutting edge, to give the more functionality, but every dollar you have to justify, right? So like this total cost of initiative is very, very important for any enterprise, for any data analytic platform, and especially with the COVID-19, where like whole world is suffering and whole world is trying to see like how to adapt with this like changing macroeconomic global changes. Like it is very important now how to optimize the whole cloud initiative, how to make sure like we run only the most critical piece of it, right? So this is very, very important right now for all the enterprises.
Right. And later in the session, I think, Rajit, would be great to compare how the elasticity of cloud, while and it gives a tremendous advantage, can actually lead to a bad behavior in terms of runaway cost if they are not used properly. So we'll come back to that topic in a moment. Justin, your thoughts on both over the last several years, the importance of the total cost of ownership, but most recently, due to the macroeconomic changes? How are things at Oracle Datalogics?
Well, going along with what you just said there, when we were back in our early startup days, we only had about 250 employees or so with Datalogics, and we just had a blank check to make whatever the solution was, make it work. If it required 20 nodes or 200 nodes or 500 nodes, just make it work. So that's what we did, and then we found out we gave everybody admin access into the system and everything, and people were just provisioning whatever they wanted to until they got the numbers that they wanted. Then about 4.5 years ago, Oracle came in and acquired us, and now we're part of 1,000 numbers of employees, and everybody has their own projects and their own workloads, and at that point, we've grown to like 125 production clusters, and we run 3 million Qubole compute nodes or Qubole compute units per month. So, I mean, that's a large resource footprint for anybody. And whenever everyone has to share from the same on-demand and spot usage pool, that can dry up really quick. And what we've noticed, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people working from home, obviously, and you have distractions. I have a puppy. People are home with their families and their kids. So what I'm seeing is a lot of people are logging on like first thing in the morning and queuing up a dozen or so jobs basically to run, and they'll check on them later. The problem is everybody's kind of doing that all first thing in the morning. And so where we used to have a more sustained period of submitting jobs throughout the day, now we're seeing more bursting periods, like first thing in the morning, around noontime, and again, like right before the end of the day. What can happen with that is, in some cases, people aren't monitoring those jobs. They're just kind of letting them go. Normal workloads are still processing with our normal automated pipelines. And clusters that weren't overcommitted before are now hitting their ceilings. So, again, you make do with what you can, but that's kind of an emphasis now on monitoring and ad hoc reporting and cost analysis that wasn't as stressed before is even more apparent now.
Right. Yeah, this is remarkable that how the macroeconomic changes our behavior, But on the other hand, technology can actually help us also, and we'll talk about some of those techniques in a moment. Those of you who are live audience, couple of suggestions and requests. One, feel free to submit our questions. I will be moderating the session. As we get your live questions, we will weave that in our discussion. Otherwise, at the end, we will try to cover as many questions as possible. I'm already seeing some of the questions here, so I'll weave them in. Second, the poll which we just finished, I'm actually going to activate a new poll, which is along the lines of what I asked Rajit and Justin on what is the relevance of total cost of ownership. So let's just get this going, and give me 1 second. Make sure we can. So this is a question which, if you don't have access to the QR code, let me pop up the QR code one more time for you. So that's the QR code. Take out your camera. And previously, I needed an application, but these days cameras have smarts in it. They automatically go to the right website. And if the QR code for some reason is not working, then you have poll.eb.com/some part of my last name, and that thing, you can do that. I don't think anyone. So far, we have gotten a bunch of responses, and it is same as before and more important. Okay, good. Nobody was playing prank on us by saying I never cared about it. So let's just stay there, folks. Keep on giving your questions. If you have any questions, please let us know, and I'll come back to this poll in a moment. So Justin and Rajit, clearly TCO was important. COVID has made it even more important. Could you help us understand that how you're approaching different cost optimization techniques and approaches in order to realize the savings that you're getting? And by the way, we are seeing that across the board happening, that people are adopting both techniques for both short-term and long-term. So let's talk about what are some of the techniques you are identifying for cost optimization to drive performance for the lowest TCO. Justin, how about we start with you on that one first?
Yeah, for us, it's always about on-demand versus spot allocation. At this point, we've deployed everything with heterogeneous clusters, spot fleet, and the latest method from AWS for capacity optimized spot allocation. Basically, what that means is that you configure your clusters with all the ADs and with as many different instances as you can. And basically what seems to be the most stable options for you in a given AZ, that's what you get. And then you have a better chance of holding on to it. Mm-hmm. Our standard practice is to launch clusters with only 10% of the overall cluster size as min nodes is on demand. And that's for stability and replication. And then you spot for everything else. So again, whenever you factor in that we have 125 production clusters and the average size of those is probably around 100 nodes, that adds up to a lot of instances. So we worked pretty closely with our AWS TAMs to improve our spot success rates and reduce our API calls, because we've actually been saturating them a bit over the past couple of months.
Justin, before you go on to the next idea, let me just make sure our audience got it right. So what you're saying is that you're dealing with large number of clusters. The first is that these clusters are doing a lot of scaling. That instead of dealing with fixed clusters, you're dealing with clusters that are doing auto scaling, right? And the second thing that you are doing is that you are utilizing a very small percentage of as on demand, and all the scaling is largely being done with the spot, which is a significantly lower cost. Did I get that right?
That's correct. And obviously, we don't look to eliminate on-demand altogether. You can run 100% spot clusters, but we found that actually the amount of retries ends up costing you more with using spot nodes over and over again, as opposed to just running the smaller amount of on-demand nodes. Right. In a perfect world, you would have reserved instances set aside for all of your on-demand min nodes that you use in your environment. And then everything will run at that reduced cost. And that basically means that you're only spending a little bit more than you would running 100% spot across the board.
Right. To the audience, look, there is a wide range of people with exposure to cloud and these things. So if any of these ideas and concepts you want Justin, Rajit to expand on, just shoot in the question, and I'm sure we'll be happy to go into more details around it. Yeah, please. So spot and auto scaling clearly is two very powerful techniques you have, right? What else are you doing to realize cost optimizations?
For us, at least for me, I spent a lot of time looking at the usage UI of a number of different clusters and basically look to see what the graph looks like. Kind of like with the spread of COVID-19, you're looking for a gradual curve, not really high spikes. Again, we're seeing that right now just because of the way that people are submitting jobs. But if you're seeing like where the clusters are spending 90% of their time idling and then just process really fast and hard for about an hour, there's probably ways that you can optimize that more in terms of either executor settings within Spark or just the number of jobs that people are submitting all at one time and spread those out over the course of the day instead.
Okay. I know, Justin, you're doing a couple more things, so we'll come back to that. Rajit, your thoughts, how are you utilizing different capabilities in cloud and Qubole platform for cost optimizations?
Yes. So as Justin said, right, the main key factor is the monitoring about your usage, right? So every day, like you should have like somebody who is dedicated to look at your AWS cost, and also the new Qubole Cost Explorer, which is kind of great for us to understand like how like we have got multiple different accounts, right? Because like we have got different kind of use cases and different kind of user set and different kind of environments, right? Like prod, stage, dev, QA, and all kind of stuff, right? And so every environment has different Hive metastore and all, and then every environment have multiple different clusters, right? Even like different cluster, Hive, Spark, Presto, and even in Hive and Spark, there are different kind of clusters, right? To monitor all these clusters, you need a proper cost explorer, cost analyzer, which actually Qubole provided us, which is of great help. So we actually created some visualization, created some model to find out like where we are spending more money on, right? So which clusters are the main chunk of money hungry clusters, right? So so identify that. That's a major task. Then like to find out like how to optimize the cost, right? So when we created the architecture, yes, absolutely, the very first thing we did is like with the Qubole feature, like auto scaling up and auto scaling down and taking consideration of high spot utilization. It was embedded inside the architecture, right? At the same time, like as we can submit the job to Qubole driver, so we don't have to keep the cluster up and running all the time. So Qubole cluster will be up when you submit the job, right? So we always make sure like auto, enable auto shutdown, and then like put a particular ideal timeout, right? We actually were very conservative, like put like 15 or 20 minutes to, if it is cluster is idle, just shut down. When somebody is submitting the job, it will bring up the cluster. And that actually saved a lot of money to not to run this cluster for a long period of time. And then with this COVID-19, so things are becoming more aggressive, right? Aggressively, we need to find out like what are the cluster we can scale down actually? What are the user community we can say like, okay, these are the user community who are doing more experiments, not doing the high SLA or high business critical jobs, right? We can actually talk to them and find out like, can we reuse our non-performing colo clusters for kind of workloads, or like where some jobs are very advanced, or like they are bursty in nature, where like I submit the job, it should take like 200 nodes, and then when it is not running, it comes down to 3 nodes, right? So that kind of workload we are trying to push into the cloud right now. And and then another thing is another big expense is S3, right? So like we have seen like S3 data, both data and the API calls actually can take up a lot of your budget. So like we are doing the ST Explorer also to find out like what are the different things, like what are the different data which is not useful. Especially I would like to mention one thing, like when you're having a Hadoop cluster, you should not enable trash, because like if you enable trash, like the S3 will keep taking those trash data, and then your S3 bill will be keep growing, right? So so I mean, like these are the different techniques we are taking to mitigate this like COVID-19 situation.
Right. So Rajit, you said something very interesting. In addition to auto scaling and Spot that Justin had talked about, you also talked about the notion of cluster lifecycle management, where the notion that cluster is only there when you need it. So in some sense, you're saying cluster is only there when you need it. The cluster is right sized, and it is built using the right type of Spot instances, etc. You also said something, and I want to make sure we'll come back to that, is the nature of making a decision between something which is on-prem versus something which is cloud. So let's hold that thought for a moment. I'll come back to it. Justin, I wanted to hear your thoughts. You talked about Spot, but I know you are actually using different instance types also in your designing your clusters. Could you expand on that, how utilizing different instance types that are available in cloud can give you further optimizations in cost?
Yes, like for example, with our Hive clusters, we actually use a combination of the C and M instance classes within AWS. Basically gives you the best balance between CPU and RAM. And therefore, if you utilize both of those entire families across the 4th and 5th generation, you have like 4 or 5 different instance types that you can pull from.
Right.
So from a sizing standpoint, though, what we actually do is we figure out what the base resource requirements are for whatever workload the team is looking to do. So let's say they need a 50 node cluster of what would be considered an M5 4X type. When we provision the heterogeneous config, we include the 4Xs, but we also go 1 or 2 sizes, both lower and upper from the 4X. So in this case, we'd use X, 2X, 4X, 8X, and then 12X in some cases. Basically, what that means is you're allowed to use a combination of different instances that add up to whatever that actual overall amount is that you're looking for. The exception to that rule is if somebody's running a really big cluster, we don't want them running like 500 of M4 large whenever they could be running 50 or so, because you're still going to possibly run into your on-demand limits or run into just using all up of one type of Spot. And then when someone else launches a cluster that requires just 200 R4-4Xs or something, they can't pull any. So this basically gives us like 10 different instance types that we can use for a given cluster and come up with whatever combination that you can run. And whenever you're using the capacity optimized Spot allocation that I talked about earlier, you're going to get a stable combination of those and basically guarantee you the best uptime and most stable processing environment.
Right. So this may be not clear to some of our audience, but what you're talking, Justin, here is an ability to create clusters which are heterogeneous in nature. So these clusters are heterogeneous in on-demand reserved instances and Spot instances, but they're also heterogeneous by allowing you to use different instance types based on the right combination of CPU and memory. Is that correct, Justin?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Rajit, are you also using a heterogeneous instance type in addition to Spot in your workloads?
Yes. So that is kind of with the Spot, as Justin mentioned, like with the Spot fleet and then different kind of instance type in the same cluster, especially for Hive and Spark, not in Presto. So we are definitely using it because like we actually standardized as R4 8XL large or I3, right? So these are the 2 different things, like R4 8XL large with EBS volumes and I3 with NVMe SSD, right? So like depending on different kind of workloads, we are actually trying different kind of instance type, right? But at the same time, we actually did some experimentation with the same kind of, like in the same cluster, 2 different kind of nodes, right? So, and that gave us a very good, success rate with like low cost and getting the Spot in time, and Spot is not taken away, and like Spot utilization is very important, but at the same time we need to make sure like when you are serving like high critical SLA bound workloads, your Spot should not be taken away, right? So there like multiple heterogeneous cluster is kind of very useful because like if the spot market does not have those kind of nodes, then like your job is stuck or like is taken away. Your whole shuffle has to be done from some other nodes, right? So this is heterogeneous node provisioning is very critical for us.
Right. You're absolutely right. Heterogeneous was always important, but with this spot, it has become even more important. Both of you said something which I know to you is no-brainer, but I think it's something which many of our customers and prospects that I talk to, it is a bit of an adjustment. Both of you just very casually mentioned multiple engines. And I want to pause for a moment on the TCO aspect of it. I want to come back to another example of optimization, that you are not using one size fit all approach. You are actually using multiple engines which are designed or optimized for different workloads. So Rajit, will you talk about how you're making this decision, Hive, Spark, Presto, or other engines? And what is that decision criteria in your mind?
So when we actually enable Presto in our Polo cluster, right? So we say like if your, general rule of thumb is like if your query is running in Hive less than 30 minutes, you should use Presto, right? So that like your latency will be very less, right? And like then like you need to basically choose like Hive or Spark. Which query engine you should use. But the problem is in Colo environment, like to run the same query on 2-3 different engines, you need to go to 3 different endpoints to run those, right? Or 3 different way, like especially Spark SQL. You need to go to a particular, edge node to go to Spark shell and then run it, right? So with Qubole, it was very useful for us because in one console, I can run the same query on the 3 different execution engine, right? And then users can, it's a kind of a self-service. User can always find out like where my query is running faster. So if they choose the right execution engine, that is actually win-win situation both from the user perspective as well as infrastructure perspective, because if your query is taking less time, that means you're spending less amount of resource, and we are saving money, right? So that's why like we actually told our users, make use of this Qubole console or make use of Qubole driver to submit your query on 3 different execution engine and see like which one is giving you faster response and choose it. I mean, like run your query in those engine.
Right. I think inherent in the way you have architected this are a couple of things which are worth highlighting. One is that you have decoupled the storage, the data from the actual compute layer. So you're no longer tied to, which was one of the problems that in a co-located system. The second is that you have given a unified environment, so they don't have to keep on worrying about it. You don't have to worry about user access controls and anything. All of those are coming from a shared environment, right? So those things allow you to bring this flexibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and with like, and as financial companies, right? Like access control, authentication, encryption, security is very, very important, right? And with like Ranger is the most important tool for us for the authorization, right? Not only authentication. So as Ranger was integrated with both like all these 3 engines, right? Like Hive, Presto, and Spark. With one Ranger policy, we can actually like monitor and control the user access via Qubole, right? So very, very important for us.
Great, thanks, Rajit. Justin, how about you? How are you allowing your users to have flexibility of utilizing the right engine for their data analytics and machine learning needs?
Yeah, I'd say at this point, the vast majority of our environment is Spark, just because from a user experience, it seems to be the most flexible. We have a lot of devs that like to jump back and forth between Hive and Spark, so they can run both on one cluster that way. So we just give them a Spark cluster and say, go to town. But we've actually found that some of our analytics departments and divisions, they prefer working in Presto just because they feel like it's lighter weight, and some of them have more of a SQL Server background and stuff like that, so they're used to kind of that friendly SQL syntax and stick to more basic operations. What we have found though is that people still try to do like large brute force operations in Presto. Like I want to create a 20 million row table in Presto, and And we try to basically tell them, no, that's probably not the best thing to do for that, because but we actually, I have an example of it this morning. Somebody had provisioned the cluster to use a hard set amount of memory per node in Presto, and they submitted a job that was above the maximum allowed amount. So then nodes just started dropping off of their cluster. So again, if you set those type of parameters and you're not sure exactly what they do, they can have some adverse effects in the Presto world, whereas Hive especially is a little bit more forgiving, and Spark, it has a larger learning curve, but you can obviously aggressively use your resources if you really know how to use them.
Right. I think this notion of what at Qubole we have been talking about, and I've had discussion with both of you, the notion of open data lake, where you have a data lake, which is a common repository of data set. It has access controls, Rajit, as you talked about with the Wright, user access controls are there. It has a shared environment in order to give the flexibility of the right engine for right kind of tool sets. And these engine choices, as you both of you talked about, are not only relevant to what is the right engine, but also the experience part of it. So as people are moving from on-prem to cloud, they do not want to do multiple jumps. So I think all of this flexibility, I think, is extremely critical. So I'm very glad that you're making use of those open data lake kind of concepts. Justin, you have a very interesting challenge. Not only you are very cloud sophisticated, you actually have to deal with multiple clouds. Can you talk about how multiple clouds has in some ways created challenges as well as opportunities in your journey over the last 5 years of data analytics and machine learning workloads?
Yes, we've actually been migrating to the Oracle Cloud probably over the last 2.5 years now. We only have about 10% of our environment out there at this point. And part of the struggle with that is we've really put a larger emphasis on knowing what your resource utilization is within your cluster. Because as we carve out chunks of the new cloud environment, especially since we're a growing cloud, we need to justify every 500 node request that we have. So the onus is on teams to basically say, okay, go back to AWS, look at the Spark UI, look at the jobs that you're running, come back with your average CPU and RAM utilization footprint, and let us provision the best thing for you then in our Oracle Cloud environment. Obviously, the side effect of that is that you have a lot of redundant processes that end up running in both locations, because you have teams that are still dependent on the old object store or old S3 locations. And then how do you get the teams onto the new environment? So we've been prioritizing teams and workloads based on, okay, who plugs into the most dev teams and the most offices nationwide, and what jobs does it make the most sense to make the most effort to get it into the new cloud right now. And then we can start having people piggyback onto that as the data sets are available over there.
Right.
It obviously requires a lot of coordination with teams in terms of timelines and expectations, and basically saying, okay, this is what you used to do over here. Now let's refactor this and see if you can do 20% over here and do 80% in the new environment, and kind of work those percentages back until you can get 100 into the new environment. But in some cases, it's taken like 6 months to get a fully migrated pipeline from one environment to the other.
Yeah, these things can, but I think on the other hand, it is assuring that in case, because of strategic reasons or the corporate mandates, if you do need to, that flexibility exists because of once again the standardization of data sets, etc. So and I know in your case, Rajit, your journey has been moving workloads, deciding to go from colo to cloud, public cloud. Could you talk about how's that journey been? What are the decision factors? And in particular, how does this play out in light of cost requirement optimizations?
Yes, actually, like we learned a lot of things, and I wanted to share in this platform is like anybody who is basically thinking about migrating their workloads from colo to AWS, probably like they need to brainstorm and find out like why they are doing it. Like cloud gives a lot of opportunity. The very first thing it gives is, like as we discussed, right, like separation of data and the compute, right? So which in Colo, it's like, all embedded into one particular monolithic cluster, multi-tenant cluster. And then, so do we really need that kind of architecture, right? So what is the driving force for that? Do you have multiple different departments with multiple different environments? You don't want to copy the data multiple times and those kind of stuff, right? So, and if that is your case, and then the second thing is like, what is your nature of your workloads? Is it a bursty nature, or if it is like, constant, you are getting same kind of workload throughout the day, right? Or
Right.
throughout the quarter or throughout the month or something like that. What we have seen is like in nighttime, our cluster is stressed. So it is not having enough resource. And then in most of the days, probably it's not utilized much, right? So every time we actually are having this resource constraint, both in the data size and the compute size, and also, and that's another thing, right? Your data growth and the computation growth is not going in in linear fashion, right? Probably your data growth is high or computation is low. In our case, it's kind of reverse. Our data is not like on petabyte scale, but the thing is, like, our computation, it is a computation heavy, right? So we need like more compute power, right? So, but we need to buy this hardware, like, and like that's a kind of a stable cost, right? We need to keep running that in data center, keep running, we need to say, spending cost for electricity, spending cost for, administration, system admin, and all kind of stuff, right? But what we are getting out of it at the time when it is needed, we are not getting enough resource, right? So cloud actually gives you that kind of capability, is like whenever you need it, you spend it, and if you are disciplined, you just shut it down, right? So it is kind of win-win situation where you are basically meeting your SLS, like you're adding the value to your business, but at the same time, you're not spending a lot of money. Constant spending is not there, right? So that's why, like, these decisions are very important. And for us, like, that was the driving force. And the second thing is, we started seeing is different kind of, workloads or different kind of use cases are coming where we need different environments.
Right.
And create a different environment is a very big deal in Colo, right? So you need to basically set up a new cluster and like order for new hardwares and all kind of stuff, right? So with this COVID-19 situation, like, we have got a lot of new features. We actually have seen a lot of new features coming, and they have new kind of data set coming to experiment and roll out the feature fast, right? So then this cloud environment gave us the ample opportunity to react to that situation, right? So those are the driving force why we thought of moving to cloud, right? So like go fast, like support the bursty nature, and then like support all kind of execution engine and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Great. So if I were to summarize what both of you said, I think the cloud gives you tremendous flexibility, but it comes also with responsibility.
Yes.
And it comes with the skills needed and the software stack needed that gives you flexibility to do things we talked about: start clusters when you need them, scale clusters, utilize the spot instances, heterogeneous instances, choose the right engine that is there, right? One of the things I know both of you are very good at it and been driving it even more aggressively is this notion of there is a cost, but then there's about governance of the financial governance and know where the costs are. So if we were to define financial governance as a transparency into where the costs are being consumed and provide the safety guards, etc. Could you talk about, Rajit, on how you are utilizing financial governance? What are the different value levers you have? And then we'll talk about on how actually you're implementing it.
So yes, absolutely. So as we mentioned, like, first of all, like we have to use this like cost explorer, right? So both AWS and the Qubole, right? We need to tag those every instance, every cluster properly, so that like you can.
Rajit, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment. Some of our audience may not know what Cost Explorer is. So can you just take 30 seconds, describe it, and then talk about how you use it?
Yes. So we talked about two Cost Explorer, right? So one is like in Qubole, like Qubole came up with a new feature of Cost Explorer, which basically gives you the how much QCU you are using. QCU means like like the unit where like we measure the how much Qubole units we are using, right? So which cluster is using like how much QCU, what time, and this historical pattern, and those are data is already part of the Qubole platform, right? And then we can use that data to like we created some notebook out of it and to create like do some visualization like which cluster is using how much QCU, which environment is how much QCU, what is the distribution between your spot node and on-demand node, what are the different node type you are using in different clusters, right? And because that you can actually tag along like which node type is actually adding more expense to your portfolio, right? At the same time, we also do the AWS Cost Explorer, like which actually gives you like S3 usage, cluster usage, EC2 usage, EBS volume usage, all the API calls and everything, right? So then these two, if you mix together, you can have a proper visualization is what is your current footprint is right now with like expense is right now, right? So and then you can actually pin that with the utilization of like it's a department. Let's say like we have got 15 departments who are using it. So what we have tried to do is we created a separate cluster for each of these departments, right? So like so like let's say like risk or finance or marketing. So they have their own clusters, and we created some role with the RBAC in Qubole, so that like let's say I am a marketing user. When I go to Qubole console, I can submit Hive job or Spark job or Presto job only to my clusters, right? In that way, your users and workloads are completely isolated. And now tomorrow morning, when I see my dashboards, I can see like which department has used how much. That will give us a chargeback model, implement chargeback model, as well as other than that, like also what we did is like there are different kind of workloads. Some workloads are bursty in nature. We give it in like beefy nodes cluster, right? Some workloads are always running, like the small Hive, tiny Hive or Presto queries and all. We actually push that into long running clusters, right? So that like those clusters will be long running, but it will not utilize much QCUs because there is no strict SLAs and they are like short lived workloads, right? So that's how you can actually purely model that whole workload, like where you are spending more money, and then like if required, you can actually shut down click a switch that like okay, I'll shut down that cluster. That will give me the big bucks. And that's how actually in the COVID-19 situation we understood like where to like reduce the cost or reduce the investment so that like we can save more money.
Right. And Rajit, one thing which I liked how you did this is that you did all these changes, but as far as user was concerned, they didn't have to worry about which clusters and all that. This was transparent. They were getting a serverless experience, whereas these things, as the data admin and you were actually environment admin, you were able to make these things in a very transparent manner without user having to worry about it.
Yes.
Yeah. Justin, how about you? How are you utilizing financial governance and Cost Explorer for in your organization?
Yeah, Cost Explorer actually came around at a good time for us because we had a number of legacy reporting tools that were all marked for decommissioning. And so we needed something that would basically come up with all that stuff as a comparative product, and it worked out well. And one specific example for us is that we have tons of analytics departments, and some of them are just purely R&D and basically proof of concept groups. And basically what they'll do is they tag their jobs all with, a specific customer ID or whatever. And they run their theoretical table creations and big data processing workloads, and et cetera. And then they'll use Cost Explorer to basically say, okay, for projected customer A, I ran these jobs last month, and I've basically figured out that I use this much on demand, I use this much spot for just that customer. And then basically they can go to the production analytics groups and say, okay, based on my POC numbers, this cost me $500 or something to run last month. So whenever you talk about doing your contract with the client, basically expand that out over the 1 or 2 year period, and that's how much we basically use to charge for the project that we're working on. And from management's perspective, then they're doing it on the backside. They're basically saying, okay, these are the numbers that you forecasted. This is what all of your jobs in the analytics development group has cost last month. Based on the numbers that you're charging, this is at or under or over what expectations are. So that's really worked well from both an ad hoc perspective for both management and for the devs themselves. As for myself, I run numbers every month, basically of the overall QCUH and compute costs for the entire Qubole environment, both clouds, obviously, and then break it down by team, and then look to see who's going up and down over a given month. If a team's QCU is going down, but their costs are going up, that means they're likely using more on demand, or they're using higher resources than they actually need. And then I need to do a deeper dive with them to figure out, okay, what are you using? How are you using it? Do you need to do some executive tuning or whatever? And so Cost Explorer plus, obviously some spreadsheet foo or whatever, it helps to put all that together and basically keep my management bosses happy.
Good. Always important to do that. So it sounds like it's not only about utilizing the lot of capabilities that cloud has. We talked about auto scaling and Spot, but also bringing a notion of governance and transparency to it. And looks like in some cases you use this for chargebacks. In some cases you use for ROI decision analysis. Is it really worth doing it? Right. I know we are coming to the end of it, and there are a couple of questions from the users. But before we go to the user question, let me ask you guys, there's significant amount of experience both of you have, and you have shared some of these things. But if you were to give the Zen of all your experience, what are some of the 2 to 3, 4 best practices you will share with our audience that they can incorporate? And I want to highlight both something they can use tomorrow, and then what are some of the things they can do over the course of, let's say, next couple of weeks or months. So we'll start with you, Rajit. With all the wisdom, what would you like to share with the folks on things both in the short term and long term?
Monitor. So like the day you have decided to go to cloud, from day one, you should have the capability to monitor your cost, right? Otherwise, in very short period of time, you'll be questioned like, why the hell you're spending so much of money, right? Second is what is the use case? What is the return of investment you are getting from this workloads which is running in AWS? Does it really need to be in AWS or any cloud environment, right? That the third thing actually any new use case, you basically think twice before putting into cloud. The next thing is use short-lived cluster, use high Spot utilization, use auto elasticity. So these are the key factors to when you are using any cloud environment for your big data workloads.
So you said monitor, so know where you're spending, otherwise you can have runaway. I always find it amusing. People say runaway cluster. I don't think there is any such thing as runaway cluster. You have runaway users, if you will. So know what those are. The second thing that you talked about, know your workload. So know why you're using what you're using. And the third is that a whole slew of very sophisticated techniques and capabilities that are there. Make sure you utilize those with the right platform, analytics platform. Great. Rajit, those are very good advice. Justin, what is your 2 or 3 Zen or words of wisdom for our audience?
As we've both expressed, the key is to utilize Spot and all the technologies that go along with it as much as possible. So the more that you use heterogeneous configs and the more that you embrace Spot Fleet and capacity optimized Spot allocation, the more flexibility you give yourself, and therefore the more clusters that you can basically run in parallel and not run into problems. But on the flip side of that, if you're dealing with devs that basically believe that they have hard set resource requirements, you need to talk them off of that ledge and convince them that maybe R44Xs aren't the only thing that they absolutely need. When we were back in our startup days, everybody wanted a 200 node R44X cluster, and we hit our on-demand limits all the time. We hit, we ran out of Spot by 10 o'clock in the morning. We ran on demand for 5 or 6 hours every day. So whenever I started to push everybody towards heterogeneous, it's like, okay, you have to do some math, but you all have degrees that probably have math associated in them. So at this point, it's fun. Make a game out of it, you know. At Data Platforms in 2018, I brought Legos and we built clusters with different colored Legos with different instance types, and basically said this was a 50 node, you know, 200 gig cluster. So, you know, the more that you hard set parameters, configuration parameters on clusters, and the more that you hard set instance types on your clusters in your environment, the less flexibility that you have for your environment overall, and the more trouble you're going to have as you try to grow.
Right, right. I think this is a very satisfying point for those of us who have been in the industry. We built many of these capabilities several years before people started adopting it. So, for example, what we did with cluster lifecycle management or auto scaling. Auto scaling is a very commonly thrown term, but you can say that sophistication of auto scaling matters a lot because there are systems out there that will auto scale things that are either too aggressive and end up incurring cost, or they will not do it fast enough. You end up taking a hit on the performance. So getting that algorithm right is very important. Getting the spots right is very important. So I'm very glad that those capabilities that we built in Qubole, actually you were able to make use of it. There are a couple of questions that came in there. One of the question is that as people are starting their journey, there is a lot that you have done. What if somebody is just starting it? What are the first couple of things that they should be watch out? I think Rajit, you talked about monitoring, but what is something that somebody can do in the next few weeks as they're starting their cloud journey, or they might already be in cloud but may not be utilizing sophisticated capabilities for cost optimizations, etc. So, what are one or two things you will advise them to do in the next few weeks time frame?
Is it for Justin or me?
Either one of you. We're the tail end. Feel free. We have got so either Rajit or Justin. Either of you can take that.
Yeah, Justin, you can go ahead.
As I said, the more that you can kind of quantify what you're using and be aware of basically what your average footprint is, the better off you'll be, especially if you can't grow very aggressively right at the beginning. Even if you can run 10 or 20% of your workloads in a cloud environment as you transition, that basically gives you a starting point. And what I've said to a lot of interns and devs that come in on, you know, green into the environment, start really small, especially if you're coming from a SQL background. Just get your feet wet with different Hive queries and stuff, build some small tables, figure out how auto scaling basically affects your workload and affects the settings and parameters that you're trying to use. The biggest problem that we run into is that people copy paste code from seasoned developers, and you know it's if you take code that's designed to run on a 500 node R4 8x cluster, it ain't going to work on on an M4 2x, no matter how you do it. So you need to understand, okay, if I am using stuff that deviate from the default parameters, how does it impact my job? How does it impact how it's going to run? Again, make sure that you know what your SLAs are and what level of parallel processing that you want to do. Any cluster can run any size job if you tweak the knobs enough. The problem is whenever you want to run 5 or 10 or 20 jobs all at the same time on that same cluster, that pie disappears very quickly. And you need to understand how each person's of the pie impacts that overall capacity.
Right.
So to add to Justin's note, right? So another observation we noticed is like when you're running a Hive query or Spark query, so you need to make sure like you don't have a lot of skew in the query. So what happens is you will see like you started a query with maybe big map phase actually spanned across all the nodes, right? Then in your reduce phase is having due to skew, probably only 2 nodes are running, 2 containers are running, but you will be seeing my whole cluster is standing out for a long period of time, but our memory or CPU utilization is very, very small. It will be like questioning, the question will come to your mind, like what the hell this cluster is doing, right? So, but because there is a skew, there is a lot of shuffle is happening from all the nodes and those kind of stuff, right? So this shuffle and like residual temporary data is kind of very, very notorious thing, like when you are basically not able to scale down the cluster. So you need, in those cases, like as an infrastructure team cannot help you. You need to tune your query to find out like why it is taking so much of time in my reduce phase, right?
Right. Good. Couple more questions have come in. One of the question is, what is Qubole's winning proposition for data lake of choice? I certainly feel comfortable answering that. But since you guys are very expert users of it, what do you think is your biggest value at Qubole provide through your data analytics and machine learning platforms? Rajit, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think one thing is like I have one platform which can serve all my purpose, right? So I can run all my different workloads in there, like it's a Hive, Spark, Presto, machine learning, or even I think some new features are coming. And then like Qubole has a very good ecosystem built up, right? It can be integrated with Tableau, SAS, or all the BI tools, or maybe like it can even like integrated with SageMaker, AWS tools, and those kind of stuff. So that's a very well positioned product, and it's pretty matured. And another thing is like I personally actually thank Qubole for assisting in every bit and pieces. Like when we started, we didn't know anything about Qubole, and like we struggled a lot of in a lot of different things on with some AWS tools and all, right? So like the amount of guidance you guys have given and amount of support you guys have given, which is kind of immensely important for us, so that like
it's our pleasure.
Migration. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rajit. It's our pleasure. It's always fun to see our customers take up new challenges and work with them and seeing you successful. Justin, you probably know about Qubole as much as any other customer out there. And you also know a whole bunch of other alternate techniques out there. What do you think is Qubole's winning proposition for data lake?
I mean, the best thing for us has been the fact that it's multi-cloud capable. At least whenever we point somebody to Oracle Cloud as opposed to AWS, they don't have to deal with the learning curve of learning a new platform or a new product. It's basically the same UI, and in some cases, it can be the same code that they just copy paste into the other environment. So that's really helped us a lot. But I would say it's also been a very versatile product for us over the past 5 years. I mean, we've plugged everything from like Tableau to Kafka to now doing Kubernetes into it. So it's always had different options of webhooks and different ways that you can plug into different things. And the new Spark streaming capabilities are probably going to be a big thing for us over the next calendar year. Yeah. So we're always looking for new ways to push the envelope and blow everything up. So
good.
You guys have been willing to help us in that regard.
Great. So I think both of you hit on things that's been our vision. Be able to create a single unified environment data lake, which is open, which allows access across any cloud you talked about, across any engine. We believe that organizations should not have to make a platform choice in order to do different workloads. Data engineers should be building pipelines that are consumed by data scientists, and the same data sets could be utilized for data analysts, and be able to do that in a flexible manner using the right engine technologies that are constantly evolving. So yeah, you guys are definitely making use of it. In between, I think one of the things that I feel really proud of is that we actively listen to customers. So for example, Cost Explorer came because they were customer of ours who were running some very, very expensive workloads. It's not something we just conceived in our cubicle. So the dialogue is great. Well, I thank both of you for sharing your thoughts and experience insights. To the live audience, I hope you find the webinar helpful. We'll be sharing the recording with you. Please do feel free to reach out to me directly. It's mohit@qubole.com. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We got LinkedIn feed I have, so please give us directly a comment. And look forward to working with you, rest of you in the live audience, to help you get the benefits that Justin and Rajit have been able to utilize. Once again, Rajit and Justin, thanks a lot for your help. I truly appreciate your insights.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, signing off. Take care, guys. Be
Bye.
safe and take care of your families. Bye.